Hey pottery people, so I'm in the studio today and I wanted to talk a little bit about centering clay because I know with the students that I've had that tends to be one of the more difficult things for people to kind of grasp. So I thought maybe I would go through it a little step by step, a little bit maybe more in detail, and see if I can maybe help you out a little bit. So I have my pottery wheel here, and my wheel head, like, I never put clay directly on my wheel head. I always use a bat. So there's this bat, which is a plastic bat, has the holes in it that just clip right onto the pins, and then I also have these wooden bats. These are like a hard pressed board, so it also just kind of slips right onto these bat pins. They come in all different shapes and sizes. I have just this little square plastic one. The biggest difference between the plastic bat and the hard pressed wood bat is when I use a plastic bat, I never get it wet before I attach my clay. If I'm using one of the hard pressed wooden bats, I do get it a little wet before I attach my clay. So, like, not sopping shiny wet. I just dampen it a little bit so like the color is a little bit darker. So today I'm actually going to use my little plastic bat here. This one has holes on the bottom side, so it attaches on top of my wheel pins. Like I said, I do not wet my plastic bats. So the first thing you have to do is get your ball of clay nicely stuck to your bat. So it has to be pretty well adhered on there, so when you start your wheel spinning fast, your clay doesn't go flying off. I actually have that happen quite a bit in my classes, so we're gonna try to figure out how not to do that. So I have about 1.5 pounds of clay here, which is a good size to start with, so kind of like a nice navel orange size. So something I can like comfortably get my hands around. And I've already pounded this into kind of a round ball. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slam it onto my bat, aiming for my center mark, and we'll kind of see what happens. So I can see on my bat exactly where the center is and slam it on there. So it's pretty spot on. It's actually pretty stuck on my bat right now, but I'm still going to press it down just to make sure that when I start it spinning, it's not going to go anywhere. So you can actually like pinch your edges down so that kind of sticks it all the way around to the bat. I don't generally do that, but you can do that if you want. So some of the most important things when centering is that your hands are touching or connected and that your arms are braced. I feel personally that those are two of the most important things when you are centering clay. Of course, adding water is very important too, but I feel like that just almost goes without saying, but maybe not. So I have my bucket of water here. I'm gonna dip both my hands in the water and then just let some water fall on my clay. So you need to have your clay slippery so your hands slide against it at all times. When it starts to get dried out, it'll feel sticky and your fingers will kind of stick against it instead of letting the clay just kind of slide through your fingers. If that happens, you will likely constantly knock your clay off center because your hands are sticking to the clay and not sliding against the clay. So your body position and your hand position are super, super important. So body position, like I am sitting very close to the wheel. I have my legs kind of hugged around the splash pan. I have the pedal to operate the wheel under my right foot, which that kind of raises my right leg a little bit. So I put a brick underneath my left foot so my knees are kind of at the same height, because you use actually your legs a lot when you're doing pottery. But you use your legs to brace your arms against. So between my legs and the splash pan, that is how I am constantly bracing myself. So now that I've been talking so much, I'm going to add some more water to my clay. There's a couple of different ways that you can center clay. Actually, there's probably a lot, but I'm just going to show you a couple. A lot of people talk about coning your clay, which is pulling your clay up and then pushing it back down. I do that when I'm centering my clay, but that's not the only process that I use for centering clay. I'm more focused on pushing in from the side and pushing down from the top. And I forgot to mention, if anybody doesn't know, I'm a backwards potter. So I spin my wheel clockwise, where most potters will spin counterclockwise, which means my hand position is opposite. If you've watched a lot of other potters on the wheel, normally their left hand would be on the side of the clay and their right hand would be on the top. So I'm opposite. My right hand is on the side, my left hand is on the top. So we're gonna go over that way of centering first. So I'm gonna, again, wet my clay. I'm gonna use kind of like across the heel of my hand and down here into my hand. So like this side of my hand is flat against the bat. And then I'm gonna tuck my elbow into my leg on the splash pan. Again, I'm using the heel of my hand kind of at about 5 o'clock. So if you look at a face clock, about the 5 o'clock mark. But truly, when you are centering clay, you're only working in 1/4 of your ball of clay. So within that 1/4, if I use the heel of my hand in the center of that quarter and I'm pressing it inwards towards the center of the clay, that is very helpful. I can't press inwards like over this way because that's not going to center my clay. I can't press inwards over this way because that's not going to center it. You have to press inward right towards the center of your ball of clay. And then my left hand will go on the top of the clay. So I made this like 1/4 mark here. My left hand almost traces those lines, but not exactly. So I have the heel of my hand right in the center of this, pushing towards the center of the clay. Then my left hand on top. So where my big pinky knuckle bends, I usually have it almost right at the center of my ball of clay. So like this. And then in that hand position, if I press inward with my side hand, downward with my top hand, my clay has nowhere to go but the center. So I talk about like pushing and pressing into the clay. Honestly, I use much more body weight than I do arm strength. So I don't consider myself to have a whole lot of arm strength. So if I can save my arm strength and save my joints, I'm going to use my body weight to help push my arms into my clay. So if I tuck my elbow, my right elbow, if you're doing this spinning counterclockwise, you would be tucking your left elbow. So I'm going to tuck my right elbow kind of like into my hip, on my leg, my forearms on the splash pan, and my left hand on top. I kind of have like both elbows kind of tucked into my body. And in this position, if I just lean forward and hold my arms steady, it pushes my arms into my ball of clay. So you can see right there that I really gently released my hands from the clay, because I'm going to show you what happens if you don't. So I have it kind of nice and centered, and if I jump off of it real quick, it knocks it off center. Alternately, if I release like one hand and not the other, you'll see it will either raise up or push down, and again kind of knocks it off center. So both hands, notice how they're connected, always working together as if they are one unit. And a gentle release. So this slip that's all over my hands, a lot of people, that drives them crazy and they're like constantly scraping it off and putting it in the bucket. I say leave it there and use it, because that will help to let your hands slide against the clay. You may need to add less water that way. So I showed you this hand position for centering. Again, tucking your elbow, heel of your hand, pressing inwards toward the center, left hand on top, both my elbows tucked into my body, leaning forward to use my body weight, And truly, like, your nose should be like right over your centered ball of clay. Gentle release. So now I'm also going to show you coning. So coning is kind of like pulling your clay up into a cone shape and then pushing it back down into like this dome shape, or right now I have kind of a hockey puck, so I'm going to alter that a little bit. If I start to cone up with my clay just like flat on the top, you will undoubtedly get this hole or divot in the top of your clay. So I like to try to get a little bit of a dome shape before I start coning. So to cone, I'm anchoring my right elbow into my body, and then my left hand is going to go on the opposite side of the clay, and I'm overlapping my fingers, so again my hands are touching and working together as one unit. So in this position, I'm just going to squeeze my hands together so you can see mine was a little flat on top because I created this big hole in the center. So now I'm just going to push down just on the outside of that to get rid of that hole, and now I'll go back to coning. So I'm going to squeeze in, let it rise up, and then when I push it back down, I'm actually not pushing straight down, I'm pushing with the meaty part of my hand here against the clay right about here, and I'm actually pushing forward and then down. So if I know I'm going to cone up again, I will leave it in like this dome shape. So then when I pull it up in a cone again, I won't get that hole in the center. So re-wet everything, hands are overlapping, arms are braced, squeeze in, let it raise up, get everything wet again, push forward and down. So when I talked about leaving it kind of cone shaped if I know I'm going to cone it up again, or dome shaped if I'm going to cone it up again, the way I do that is, I'll show you one more time. I'm going to cone up, and then when I cone back down, forward, down, and when I get to about here, I'm sliding my top hand back so that leaves my lump of clay in more of a dome shape. So when I feel like my clay is nicely centered and I'm done coning, then I'm not really worried about leaving it in that like high dome shape. Okay, so there's my centered ball of clay. So I want to show you what happens if you don't connect your hands and you don't brace your arms. So it can be quite disastrous. So I'm gonna knock that off center. So you can see it's off center, it's bumping my fingers all around. If I want to center with my side hand and my top hand, if I don't connect my hands, I have a really hard time controlling the clay, and it wants to really kind of pull my hands all over the place. And then if I try to do this without bracing my arms, so if I'm sitting up like this with nothing to brace my arms on, it's hard. See how that goes off center really quickly and easily? Because there's nothing to brace it to keep it from moving out of center.